Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about dbt macros in details. In this video, we'll talk about only dbt macros, but if you need more info on dbt, please check out my other video. I'll provide the link of the video in the description of this video. So let's start. What is dbt macro? dbt macro are reusable piece of SQL code that we can define and use across our dbt projects. And in simple words, we can think like these are similar to the functions in traditional programming language such as Python or Java. So basically, any piece of code which we want to use again and again, that we can write it in macros. It's macros allow us to like abstract that logic into a reusable component, which makes our like models in dbt more maintainable and readable. So we don't have to write the same piece of code in every model. That's why like it make models more readable and it's maintainable. If we talk about the benefits of dbt macros, so the first benefit is code reusability. The same code can be used again and again to solve similar kind of problems. So it's pretty much as like any programming language where a function can be used like in multiple places, and we don't have to write it again and again. The second is the centralized logic. So common logic is centralized in macros that improve the maintainability. So for example, if different teams are working and there are some logic which is like across the board is same, that can be centralized. The other benefit is cross database compatibility. So macros can be used with across different databases. So for example, in our case, we are connecting with BigQuery, but it could connect with Snowflake, Redshift, Postgres, and those kind of. And if we write a macro for one, it can be used with the different databases. So that ensures the consistency of our models. They don't break if we move from one database to other. And with this capabilities, like we even create like dynamic SQLs. So that basically like automating our job and which like improve the efficiencies of our work. And as we already know, like models are defined as like .sql files within the macros directory of dbt project. So we're going to see that in the demo. But for now, this is the theory of dbt macros. Now let's look into like what's the role of Jinja in dbt macros. So before we, so if we like talk about Jinja is nothing. It's just like a template engine, or it's like a templating language, which we can combine with SQL in dbt. And if you guys are coming from Python background, so Jinja is like a web template engine, even in the Python programming language. So same template engine is used here. In dbt, we can combine Jinja with SQL to make our code more dynamic and to give it more capabilities which a SQL can't do. So basically using Jinja turns our dbt project into more like a programming environment, and that give us abilities to do things that that are not normally possible in SQL. Like for example, like if statements, for loops, those kind of things, which we can't do in SQL. And also like we can reference variables, which we can do in SQL, but like referencing environment variables and variables outside the projects, those kind of things. And also like we can change the like project behavior based on the target. So basically we also like that also help us to incorporate the software development cycle functions too. So for example, if the target is prod, we should do something as per the prod thing. If it is deb, that's so basically it. In simple words, we can say like it makes our like our models or our dbt in general much more stronger. It's more stronger dynamic SQL, we can say. And Jinja is not something which we only used in macros. It can be used in models, test, analysis, or other places too. Before we start writing our first macro, I like to share a Jinja template cheat sheet, which I have prepared so like who don't know Jinja, they don't feel overwhelmed like, okay, now we have to learn Jinja too with SQL to understand DBT. So it's pretty like straightforward, not too complex. So I've created a cheat sheet which specifically I can say tailored for DBT use cases. It's not limited to this, like it can be beyond that, but I feel like if somebody starting their journey in DBT, like this is like good enough. So let me go to that cheat sheet. So this is the Jinja cheat sheet I was talking about. Let's look into the Jinja cheat sheets concept. The first one, if you see, is the expression, and expressions are basically like two curly braces with something in it, and they are used when we want to like reference something or even call a macro, models or variables kind of things. So if you recall, like if we want to refer a model, it has to go between these curly braces and then this. And the same way we can refer variables, and also and in Jinja pretty much like everything goes in these like in the expressions. The second thing is the statements. The statements are basically used to do something, or we can say like it's a syntax where you want to have some control flow. So for example, here we are seeing like this is for a macro, but this could be like if we, let's say if we want to use for loop, if statements, everything goes in this kind of like everything goes in these statements where like it started with the curly braces, percentage, and close with that. And here, because it's a macro, so we are ending. But in the same way, you will see like we'll see in few seconds, like for for and if loop, that goes in the same way. A third is the comment, like so if you want to comment out anything in Jinja, we have to basically put it in this format. The next is the variable assignment. So if you look at like a variable assignment as it's also straightforward, like everything between this syntax and then define your variable and assign the value to it. So for example, this is a string. The same way we can assign a list, dictionary, or even like the basic data types like integers and all those kind of things. So defining a variable is also straightforward. Like it's the syntax is a bit different, but it's quite intuitive. Like it's not something we haven't seen so far. The next thing is the white space. So white space basically is pretty much like trim, or is to trim the extra spaces on left or right sides kind of thing. So it's basically to maintain these spaces or trim the spaces. So it's come in like we can do it in three different ways. So if you look at this, like in this section, it have a hyphen. It means like it will strips on the left side. Here it have a hyphen on the right side, so it will strip on the right side. And when it has on both sides, so it will strip all these spaces from both sides. So it's pretty much like trim left, right. It's just a different format. The next thing is the control flow, and I was talking about this when I was talking about the statements. So control flow is basically give us like or it guide our code like how to transform it, what to do with it. So for example, if you look at this is a sample if else kind of code. So if started, it's checking like if target name is dev, then we do something. Else if it is prod, do something else, do something, like we can have code. But basically the idea here is to show like how we can use if else in Jinja, and the same can be incorporated in our macros, models, and like a test and other things. And in control flow, if we talk about like looping is another thing, which is not like a basic SQL capability. here we can have a for loop, which like you can see the highlighted section is the for loop syntax, which is pretty similar to what we have in Java or other places. Oh, sorry, in Python, but it's just the Jinja things. Like I think like these things like the curly braces and percentage will define like what to do and these are some like loop properties which are pretty intuitive, like they with the name like loop last, loop first, which is basically like this loop will run until the loop last is false. Something like if this will run if loop last first is. So it's pretty intuitive, like nothing complex. It's just we need to keep in mind of the syntax. I think like that's the important part here to keep in mind. Same thing with the index, which basically tell us what's the current like iteration of the loop, like and it start with 1, not the 0. Like so in some languages like index start from 0, here it start from 1. And if you look at the operators, which I think available almost in all the languages, and they're pretty straightforward too. It's just this part which I'm talking about, like these curly braces and percentage, which we need to keep in mind. And rest of them are pretty straightforward. So I think we don't have to go them in that details. The last thing is about the filters. So that's like another thing we need to keep in mind. Like in Jinja, the methods or functions are called filters. So like if you see that word, don't get confused, because in SQL, filters mean something else. But in Jinja, like I prefer to call them methods or functions. But in Jinja, in places they have been used filters for these things. And if you look at them, they are also pretty like intuitive too. Like but here is the format is a bit different. So for example, if we're using like the upper filter or method, so that will be the pipe in the name of it, and the expression is there, but like this is the format, like a pipe in this. And same thing goes with like trim, replace, length, like different kind of thing, like for example print and all those things. And same thing for the like data types. If you want to manipulate something, like these are the things. So as I mentioned, like it's nothing crazy, it's just a different format, but rest of the things are pretty same as we have seen in other programming language. Now let's jump to our first macro. So I'll go to my project on dbt cloud, and in dbt cloud I'll start with my first macro definition. Okay, so if you see here in one, so this is under our macro folders, like you can see this is a macro, and in that we have a macro named last business day of the month.sql. And there are 2 to 3 things which we need to keep in mind here. The first thing is the macro name need not to be the same with what macro we have. I know like the naming convention we have used is not very good, but what I'm trying, the point here is, like for example, if we talk about this macro, like compare dates, the macro name is not compare date.sql. It could be anything. And the second point is, within one macro, we can define multiple macros. And if you look into the first macro, so the one thing which we already know, like the syntax for macro is like basically start with the curly braces percentage macro name, and if you want to pass parameters, this, and it ends with this. So this is we already aware, but in between, if you see here, we are not using a SQL. Like we can use a SQL, but like I just want to give you the just like, okay, without SQL, how to write a macro, or basically like how to use Jinja and make your macros more dynamic. So this macro is doing nothing basic. It's not doing something crazy. It's very straightforward. So basically, if we look at the line number 1, it's setting a variable named current date to the current date in this format. And if you come from Python world, this will be making more sense to you. And after that, we basically comparing this date, like our current date, to the parameter which going to be passed to this macro. So we are not doing any much. I'll say we don't have much logic here, but the idea here is to show, okay, how to write macro. That's one thing, and second is like, what's the role of Jinja in that macro. So if you look at this, like it's basically if it checks if date is smaller, print like have this value. If it is equal, then we say same date logic, else after date logic, and if. So in this one, we are closing the our if else statement. And in a similar way, depending on like what you're trying to achieve, we can have a for loop. We can even have a like Jinja plus SQL. It need not to be Jinja or SQL. It could be Jinja plus SQL. But for this case, it's purely Jinja. There is another thing, like within the same macro, we have defined another macro, and this is basically this macro is doing, it's setting up a variable name partition key, and which basically like yesterday's date. So what it do, it's basically subtract a day from it, and we return it as a partition key. And here's like another thing. So far, we haven't seen a macro where we are returning something. Like in our last video, our macro was pretty much like a SQL statement, and the output of that SQL statement is considered the output of it. But we can explicitly return things too. So here, the idea is to show you the return for this. Okay, so once we understand a couple of things here. The first is like the macro names need not to be the same as the file name, or like file name need not to be same as the macro names. Second is we can have multiple macros within one file, and a macro could be combination of Jinja and SQL. Okay. The next thing is if we can go to our model. So this is our model, and it is also very straightforward. So in this model, if you look at this, we are setting our date, which is like 15th January 2023, and we are having a CTE, and after that we are selecting from. So in this one, basically, we are calling compare dates. We passing this date and giving this as an like as the output of that as an aliases date compare field, and same thing, like we are calling this macro, and whatever it returns is stored in the part key. Okay, so pretty straightforward, but the idea, as I'm mentioning, is to show you like how to call a macro, how to like define a macro. So basically here we are defining the macro using Jinja and SQL, and to call the macro we have to just give it the name, and if we are passing the parameter, so here we are passing a parameter, but in this one we are not passing any parameters, and it can be either ways. Okay, let me run this model. So if we click like we can do this too, dbt run as 8 macros. So now we're going to run this model, and there are like different ways to run a model. So I'll run this way, running. It is run successfully. Now we go to our BigQuery, and let me refresh this, refresh my query. If we expand it, this is our database where we are storing our models and all. And if you watch our first videos, you will understand like it comes from the JSON you have to define. Okay. model name was date macro. Click on this. We can see we have two fields. There should be only one record. So we go to preview. Yeah. So in preview, we can see we have one record. The compare field have the before date logic, and partition key is 1998, which is not what we want. So that basically means like our macro is not working as we expected, but we can edit. But here the idea is to show you more about like how to like call macros, define macros, kind of thing. And we might have to do something, but don't worry about it. We'll see that later. Now let's jump to the last topic, that is like third-party DBT macros. So far what we have seen is like we create our own macros and we can use it. But in DBT, like we can like literally install the third-party macros, and that's basically goes back to like we don't want to reinvent the wheel again and again. If somebody have already written some DBT macros, we can go to them, and so basically for the process for that, like go to DBT hub, search for the desired package. If package name if package exists, that's a condition too, and then we just need to include that package to our project, and we should be good to go. And to like how we include that package, we basically create package.yaml file and add the third-party details there, and we should be good. Okay, let me show you that like how we can do this. So if you go to, this is the DBT hub, and here we can see we have like multiple featured package. One is the DBT utils as the one of the most used ones, and they have audit helper, external expectations, code generation, project evaluators, and it's beyond that. Like these are not the only ones. For example, there was one for date, which is I think outside of these. So for example, if we go to DBT utils and we wanna like check out like what DBT underscore utils have, we can go to their like GitHub page, and if you scroll down, like you can see DBT underscore utils have so many macros, and if you wanna look into the details of them, so for example, pivot is something which is very common. So in pivot, like if we can pivot the table, and we're going to look into this example. So basically, like you can see how we call this. Like in our case, like when we were calling the macros, it was straightforward, the macro name. But if we are installing from somewhere, it has to be that dot pivot. So before we look into the example, I just want to give you an idea. Okay, so there are like third-party packages are available, and we can install them to our project. So first look into this, like how we can install. So if you look like, for example, we talk about DBT underscore utils. If we want to include this into our package, it is very straightforward. Like we copy this and add this to our package.yaml. So in my case, I already have package.yaml, but when you initiate a project, this is a YAML file which does not exist. So we can create a new file and add whatever package we want. I already have DBT, like for example, DBT utils. But if, for example, if you want something else like CodeGen, I can just copy this and paste here. So in this way, I mean, fix the indentation. So like whatever third-party package you want, we can keep adding to this package.yaml. And in your case, like you probably don't have it. So just create a new file and add it. So that's how you add the third-party packages. But once we add it, it does not mean like it automatically come into our project. So we need to run, and it always says here, like we need to run DBT dependencies to install this package. If you go and install this, and this, And that's successful. Okay, dbt got failed. Check the event. So the error says like something. It was successful. Gen. Okay, so it ran multiple times. I guess that's why. But if you look at this, like both versions are up to date. We look at this, dbt labs 4gen and dbt util both are installed and they are up to date. Last one happened basically, maybe like it ran well. And this is another thing I found, like it create a lock YAML file, but I'm not sure like what's the functionality of this. But if you wanna keep it, otherwise. But my guess is this is more like whatever package you have installed, you want them out. Okay, so the next thing I was talking about. So for example, if you want to use the pivot one, it has multiple, but in our case, we want to use the pivot one. So for that, what we need to do is basically go here. The first thing was to add the package to your package.yaml. After that, install it using dbt deps. And after that, we are good to use it. So if I go to this one, the third party SQL, if you see here, I'm using two macros from third parties, like from dbt utils. So I'm using the pivot one, and I'm also get column value. And if we go to the like GitHub again, we can get this information. Okay. Yeah, here. So get column basically, one second, what it does, not the code. Okay, let me search for that. So this macro basically returns the unique value of the column we are passing there. So if we go here, we are passing the column color and it will returns its unique value here. And if we check the pivot one, the pivot one need the column whose value we want to pivot. Yeah, column and the list of values. So we are getting list of values from this, and this is the column and it will pivot. So we'll go to our BigQuery and I'll show you. So this is our product. If you look at the preview, it's basically size and color. So it have two fields, size and color. In color, we have red, blue, green, and all different kind of colors. And in size, we have different kinds of size. But we want to pivot this. Like we want to make it like, okay, blue, just think about this, like blue, how many different sizes it have, red, how many different sizes it have. So to do that, like we need to pivot it. And if we look at this code, this is basically like us in this model, what we're doing, it's basically we have first column as a size, and after that we are pivoting based on the color and then grouping them by size. So if I already ran this and I have an output for it, so we can go and check out the output directly and look at the preview. So if you see, size was the first column, and after that red, blue, green, and it gives us the count of them. That's what our model is doing here. So hope you get the idea of how what is macro, what's the role of Jinja in macro, and how to install third-party macros. That's all for this video, and stay tuned for upcoming videos.